All right. Let me quickly go over my slides and then happy to get to Q&A. This is our disclosure because we're a public company. And we have engaged with some of you over some time, so you know us. I see some familiar names, some familiar faces. I see Maria Elvira. I see you, Tony, many others that I recognize. We really want to make a difference. We want to change lives of people living with rare diseases, and our first endeavor has been in the space of Prader-Willi syndrome. And early on, and I have vague recollections of Prader-Willi. I had vague recollections of Prader-Willi from my med school days, but as I looked more into it over the last few years, what's been obvious to me is that the ideal product has a few characteristics. It needs to make a difference in hyperphagia. It needs to durably improve cardiometabolic and other markers. It needs to reduce the various behaviors that can be associated with PWS, and it has a well-tolerated safety profile. So as we looked at all of that, and we've spent a long time doing this, as you know, and I'll walk you through briefly the journey. We do have a first to market treatment, at least in the US. We have a clinical program that we think durably demonstrates effect. And we think this can be the foundational therapy for PWS, just as growth hormone has become in some ways. So I won't dwell too much on this, but what we are trying to do is target what's called the KATP or the ATP dependent potassium channel. This is a channel that's present on many different tissues, and we think that the most direct way in which it might work in PWS is that the brain that has the hypothalamus that controls the appetite is secreting the NPY peptide from the neurons that actually contain this channel. So the drug, by virtue of crossing the blood-brain barrier, can decrease appetite by decreasing the secretion of this peptide. Now, we started a program in 2018, in the middle of 2018, and some of you were participating in this program. We call it Study C601 or Destiny PWS. It was a 13-week randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, 127 patients, 20 sites in the US, 9 in the UK. And we ran this trial over 2 years. And when we reported data from it in the middle of 2020, and you see this in the middle column here, you see that the primary endpoint was not significant, while some secondaries were significant. At the time, we didn't fully understand it, but as COVID became clearer, we did analyses excluding data from COVID and saw that the study was indeed significant. We had long-term discussions with the FDA as well as the EMA, who did not necessarily believe that to be the case. We continued to collect data in patients who stayed on drug for a long time. And what you see here is over 1 year, hyperphagia continued to improve very, very significantly. We compared it to an ongoing natural history study in the US and some other parts of the world. It's called PATH, or PATH for PWS. The data from PATH is in blue, DCCR is in green. These are decreases in hyperphagia at 6 months and at 1 year, obviously continuing to show significance. Not only that, relative to this natural history study, we saw significant improvements in all behavioral parameters over the full year of the study. These data are now published, but as I said, the regulators, both in Europe as well as in the US, did not fully believe the data and asked for additional control data. So we had about 83 patients who were still on drug at an average of about 3 years, obviously doing well, which is why they were still on drug. What we proposed, and we spoke with the patients, the families on the study, we spoke with the advocacy organizations, and we spoke with the investigators, and we proposed that we would do what's called a randomized withdrawal of these patients. The idea would be that in a blinded manner, from half the patients, the drug would be taken away, and we would see whether they worsened or not. Admittedly, not the nicest thing to do, but one, if it worked, would be the quickest way to get the drug approved. And that study was conducted, and 77 of the 83 patients consented to do it. And what we saw was a very significant worsening when you took the drug away. So I won't belabor the data that much, but the drug is relatively well tolerated. The problems that you see are increases in blood glucose, edema or swelling, and hypertrichosis, which is increases in body hair. This is from the first study. This is from the withdrawal study, and this is taken straight out of the US label. And the US label states, and the name of the drug is now VYKAT, the US label states that it's approved for patients 4 years and older who have hyperphagia and PWS. So in general, it's a fairly broad label. It allows for the treatment of, I would say, a vast majority of patients who have PWS and hyperphagia. Probably the one thing to be very careful of is that if you have high levels of blood glucose, uncontrolled blood glucose, this drug is not for you. So as we've gotten approval in the US and we are in the process of launching it in the US, we are thinking through how to best expand the access to the drug globally. And we have a group internally that's spending a lot of time in thinking about it. But in listening to some of the conversations, one of the key parameters is to make sure that there is sufficient healthcare infrastructure to support the diagnosis and management. That is critical. We need physicians who understand the disease, who diagnose the disease, and are able to treat the disease. So we need the expertise in these countries. We really want to know that there are pathways in place to facilitate. So in many cases, it is difficult, takes a very long time to get the drug actually approved. But the countries may have early access pathways or orphan drug pathways, and we're happy to take advantage of those. And the other is that some countries have higher levels of willingness to work with manufacturers than others, particularly on the pricing and reimbursement side of things. So we believe that probably the most critical part of this is advocacy. And we have engaged with advocacy over a long time. We truly believe that this is one of the most important parts of the process. We have obviously done more work in the US than we have done elsewhere, but as you'll see, we have started to do work elsewhere as well. In the US, though, we have involved advocacy starting very early on, including at the regulatory stage. So we have partnered very closely. We believe we have very close, effective relationships with advocacy organizations. And I would say to you all, I am happy to engage with you personally, as well as our group that works in the advocacy space will be happy to engage with you to understand how we can do it better. Just to quickly point out how we have been able to effectively work in the US. So in the US, there's, as you know, two major advocacy organizations, FPWR and PWSA USA. Both of them worked with us to raise awareness of the clinical trials. They hosted webinars. They helped us identify clinical investigators. I would say at virtually every meeting, we took at least one of the organizations with us because we wanted to make sure that this is not an us versus them. We wanted to be transparent. We wanted them to know what the discussion was about. And they reciprocated. When the FDA was not reviewing the data, they sent in petitions once, literally 26,000 signatures when the pre-COVID analysis happened, because the community was seeing the difference that the drug was making. And then when we actually submitted the NDA later, another petition went in. So a lot happened. We also have reciprocated. We have supported local events. We have attended and sponsored different events. We have created a community council. So there's 20 members from the community in the US that meet with our advocacy team on a periodic basis. They provide them with feedback. We are working with PWSA USA in many states, in all 50 states, in fact, to identify PWS as a disability, which allows organizations, which allows families to get other benefits than the drug itself. We are working with advocates to train them in how to speak with, PNT committees, which is kind of like the HTA process. So as we do all this, we have started a stepwise global expansion as well. The next regulatory step for us is in this quarter, we will be submitting a marketing authorization application in the EMA. And this should hopefully lead to an approval and eventually pricing and reimbursement negotiations. Along with this, and this is not on this slide, but we are engaging with several other countries as well for potential distribution arrangements. And this examples are some countries in Latin America, some countries in the Middle East and North Africa, as well as others who have approached us for conversations. So we have talked to many different organizations. We are conducting a caregiver burden study. The steering group comprises of several advocacy organizations from the US as well as from Europe. We have had multiple touch points with different advocacy organizations in France, in Italy, in Germany, as well as others. And we continue to sponsor various events and support organizations in whatever way we can. Europe is a little different. This is our next thing. It's a little different. The EMA recognizes eligible organizations. IPSO is one of them. It is a key stakeholder for the PWS community as well. That's a good thing. There is a Patients and Consumers Working Party, which has Eurordis representing rare interest, but not PWS specifically. It would be nice to see if that were to be the case. Probably the most important part is the HTA conversations, though, because the national patient organizations that are part of IPSO will play a really important role in the HTA process. And as you all know, access to drugs is not guaranteed in the US, in Europe. It's difficult, it's long, and it can be often hostile. So we have already started the conversations around trying to create relationships with organizations that will help us with HTA access. And as I said, we are happy and willing to engage. I'll put my email in the chat. If you have questions, please, after this, please feel free to email me. I will connect you with the right people. So Tony, I just want to leave space for questions. So I'll stop the presentation and happy to take the questions.